There are decisions in life that we regret the moment they're made, but by then, it's often delayed. This is the story of Alex, a man who thought he could outwit danger, but ended up walking straight into it. Alex was always a bit of a thrill seeker. He had an unshakable belief that nothing bad could ever really happen to him. His life was about chasing adrenaline, whether it was skydiving, exploring abandoned buildings, or his latest obsession, train hopping. To him, the world was full of risks, just waiting to be conquered. Little did he know, one of those risks would be his last. It was early spring when Alex decided to set out on one final solo adventure. His plan was simple: hop onto a moving freight train, ride it through a dark tunnel, and jump off before it reached the other side. He had done this before, but never alone. He figured he knew the ropes well enough. Plus, the remote tracks he had scouted out earlier in the day seemed perfect hidden away in the wilderness, far from the prying eyes of security or law enforcement. He arrived at the tracks in the late afternoon, the sun casting a faint glow through the trees. The air was thick with the promise of rain, and the silence was only broken by the occasional rustling of leaves. As he walked along the tracks, waiting for the familiar rumble of an oncoming train, Alex felt the familiar rush of excitement. His heart pounded in his chest, not from fear, but from anticipation. He knew the risks, sure, but danger was the part that made it fun. Finally, after what felt like hours, he heard the low, distant growl of an approaching freight train. His pulse quickened as the vibrations traveled through the steel rails beneath his feet. He crouched down, waiting for the perfect moment to leap. When the train drew closer, Alex bolted from his hiding spot, sprinting alongside the massive metal beast. With a surge of adrenaline, he grabbed the ladder on the side of a car and hoisted himself up, climbing onto the narrow platform. As the train roared into the tunnel, darkness engulfed him. The only sound now was the deafening clatter of wheels against tracks and the echoing screech of metal. The excitement Alex had felt moments before began to shift into something colder and unsettling feeling that crept up his spine. But he brushed it off. He had done this before. It was all part of the thrill. But then, something strange happened. A flash of light appeared at the far end of the tunnel, far too bright to be normal. At first, Alex thought it might be a reflection or some electrical spark from the train. But the light stayed, flickering like a flame in the distance. It wasn't natural. As the train barreled forward, the light grew brighter, almost blinding, and Alex squinted, trying to make sense of it. Then he felt a cold hand grabbing his ankle from below. His heart lurched. He instinctively kicked out, trying to shake off whatever had latched onto him, but the grip tightened. Alex screamed, his voice drowned out by the thunderous roar of the train. Panic surged through him as he desperately climbed further up the ladder, pulling himself out of reach. His hands trembled as he struggled to catch his breath, but he couldn't stop shaking. He had been so focused on the light that he hadn't noticed the real danger right beneath him. When the train finally emerged from the tunnel, Alex was gasping for air, his mind racing. He looked down, expecting to see someone or something clinging to the bottom of the train. But there was nothing. The track stretched out before him, empty and still, as if nothing had happened. He jumped off the train as soon as it slowed, his legs wobbling beneath him. His plan to ride through the tunnel had been reckless, but this was something else entirely. Shaken, Alex walked back toward the entrance of the tunnel, his eyes darting nervously between the shadows. What had just happened in there? And then he saw it, deep within the darkness of the tunnel. Two figures stood motionless on the tracks, their silhouettes barely visible against the faint light behind them. Alex froze, his blood turning to ice. The figures didn't move, but he could feel their eyes on him, watching, waiting. The realization hit him like a freight train. He wasn't alone in that tunnel. He had never been alone. Panic gripped him as he turned and bolted back toward his car. The screeching of metal echoed in his ears, but this time, it wasn't the train. It was a sound he couldn't explain, a high-pitched wail that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. His breath came in ragged gasps as he sprinted through the clearing, his mind racing with fear. By the time Alex reached his car, he was drenched in sweat, his body trembling with exhaustion. He fumbled with his keys, his hands shaking uncontrollably as he finally unlocked the door and threw himself inside. For a long moment, he just sat there, gripping the steering wheel with white-knuckled hands, trying to make sense of what had just happened. But he couldn't. All he knew was that he had made a terrible mistake. He had gone too far this time, taken one too many risks. Whatever was in that tunnel wasn't natural, and it wasn't something he could outrun. He had been foolish to think he could cheat death, to believe that he was invincible. Alex never went back to the tracks. He never told anyone what really happened that day, not because he was afraid they wouldn't believe him, but because he didn't want to believe it himself. Some things, he realized, are better left unexplained, and as for that final, reckless adventure, it was his last.